All right, today we're going over the thing that everybody wants to do in shooting, and that's reloading. I don't know why, but it's cool. I think it's just the click. All right, let's stay on track here. Let's pay attention. All our magazines are proven safe. No live rounds. These are dummies. Empty, empty, empty. No live rounds anywhere around me, and my firearm is proven safe. Show you guys as well, because the internet loves that. I don't know why, but they do. All right, let's do this. First, we need to go over how to position the mags on the body. Now, this is obviously going to change between a competition and real life scenario, whether they're concealed, but the same principles apply. We want to have our first magazine quickly accessible and in a place where our body naturally wants to get it, meaning my hand falls directly onto the magazine and my wrist isn't contorted in an odd way up or down. It's generally a good idea if you're running closed top pouches to have at least one magazine with an open top that's quickly accessible. A closed top pouch usually adds about 1 second onto your reload speed, which can be quite devastating. Now, the caveat to that is if you're running an open top pouch, you need to ensure that it's properly retentioned, where your magazine isn't falling out when you're running or rolling or upside down hanging from a tree. Regardless of the pouch type, we still want it in a position where our body wants to naturally fall to. For me, the magazine I access first in an emergency reload is directly in front of my hips. I've positioned this pouch properly for my body, and this principle is pretty standard across the board in terms of the mechanics of our arm and elbow and wrist, but you do need to make micro adjustments to these principles to ensure that your body's working with the way that your pouches are set up. For me, all I need to do is drop my arm down, I hinge at the elbow, my arm stays straight along with my wrist, and my hand falls directly on top of my magazine. My magazine can then be accessed, I hinge back up and into my gun. Now, the way that we want to position our magazines if they're in a traditional pouch setup like this is we want to do bullets to belly. That way, when we access our magazine, it comes out with our fingertip on the tip of the bullet, like so. This gives us a physical and visual index point to ensure that where our finger is, because it's at the topmost portion of the magazine, reaches the box of our magazine well. We're trying to put this rectangle in another rectangle. The reason why this is helpful is because I know where my finger is. If my finger is at the tip of the bullet, it makes it easier for me to touch the tip of my finger to the magazine well, because I know where the end of my finger is. If I move my hand down to this position on the magazine, it's a lot harder for me to put this rectangle inside the other rectangle because I don't have a point of reference on my body. We want this magazine to be an extension of our finger and our hand. It's very easy for us to put our hands together. We know where both our hands are in relation to the rest of our body. When we grip the magazine too low, it makes it harder for our body to find that magazine well in the empty space because we have nothing on our body to reference to. That's a sarcastic exaggeration. You still can make it work, okay? Relax. And the reason why we do bullets to belly, if I flip this around the other way, so the bullets are facing down to the ground or towards my back and vertical facing magazines, when I grab this magazine and bring it up to the magazine well, my wrist has to do an unnatural rotation here to get it the rest of the way. There are some magazine pouches now that allow you to position your magazines facing away from the body instead of forwards or backwards. In a competition setting, depending on the rules, sometimes we have to put our magazine pouches behind our hip bones. That gives us a less than ideal position for our elbow and for our shoulder. You can see the further my arm goes back to grab my magazine pouches, my shoulder starts rotating forward and I tend to lean over to access them. Generally speaking, the further I go back on my waistline, the more of a cant I want to induce on the magazines to allow my wrist to come back and access them more efficiently. It's the same reason when my front pouch is positioned backwards. That's where my arm wants to fall, and it keeps my arm straight when I access my magazine. The less variables we place on our body in terms of our shoulder position, elbow position, wrist position, when accessing our magazine pouches, the more efficient we're going to be in getting to them. There are two types of reloads, and a lot of different words for them. We're going to use the term emergency or reactive and proactive reloads, which are also sometimes referred to as tactical reloads. The simple difference is a need versus a want. In an emergency or reactive reload, the gun is telling us it needs ammo now. It has ran dry or experienced a malfunction. It needs some fresh ammunition in the gun. It's an emergency, we need to do it quickly. A proactive reload or tactical reload is the opposite. The gun is working fine, it has ammunition inside of it that might be running low, and we are choosing to feed it more ammunition when we have the opportunity to do so. Need versus want. There's also administrative loading, which is sometimes referred to as the third type of reload, but that's just loading your gun. You should be using that rep when you're initially loading your gun to do a good emergency reload technique. It's one extra rep you can put in when you have to put bullets in the gun anyway. We're going to cover reactive or emergency reloads first. We've come up on target, bang, 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 and a bunch of rounds later, our slide locks to the rear, indicating that our firearm needs ammunition. It is empty right now. There's nothing feeding the mouth, so it's a 1.5 pound beating stick. It's a paperweight. We want to make it a firearm again, so we need to immediately feed it rounds. Up in this state, and you're going to feel this, when you start shooting a bunch, you're going to get used to the feel of your slide locking back, and you're not going to need to see and look at it. You're going to feel it, and you can go right to that magazine. As soon as we determine that the firearm is empty, our support hand is coming immediately off of the firearm and accessing the new magazine. During this time, I'm using my thumb to hit the magazine release. During this point, I want to keep the gun as vertical as possible. If I press the magazine release like this, the magazine's not going to come out very quickly, and I'm going to hit a traffic jam here coming up. I want to ensure that the magazine falls freely, so the gun's going to stay pretty vertical as I'm clicking the button. The magazine falls freely, and by this time my hand should be coming up with the fresh magazine. I tilt the gun a tiny bit here to see the magazine well, insert, and now at this point we have the decision, this is a very widely debated decision, to either hit the slide release or come into a physical manipulation of the slide, whether that's over the top or slingshot or front serrations. Your slide release lever or slide lock lever is going to afford you the quickest way to get the ammunition back into the gun. Still at this point, there's no rounds in the chamber. To do it the quickest way, we want to hit that button down with our thumb or your support hand thumb and get the rounds in the chamber. That's going to save you about half a second using the button over a physical manipulation of the slide. You will find if you don't put dummy rounds in your magazines, your slide release is going to be a little bit harder to push down because the pressure is not really relieved as much on an empty magazine. All right, let's run through that again. We've run empty, our support hand immediately makes a movement to the new magazine while I'm rotating the firearm so I can see the magazine well. My thumb is going to release the magazine at the same time. Some people use their middle finger because they find that easier to hit. Depends how your hands work. I find it easier to use my thumb. Something that can help you index the magazine release button with your thumb is to use your support hand to twist the gun into it when you move down to grab your new magazine. That looks like this. Once I'm in this position, I'm accessing and releasing at the same time. New magazine comes up, and once I've heard that seat, I can then click the magazine release with my firing hand thumb or my support hand thumb. Some people like to use their support hand thumb to hit the magazine release because it ensures that the magazine is fully inserted before you click it. If you don't time this properly, sometimes you can get a little bit ambitious and click the magazine release like this prior to the magazine being fully inserted. So I didn't put a round in the chamber because there's nothing to grab at the time that I push the slide release down. With the firing hand thumb, that looks like this. With the support hand thumb, it roughly looks like this. No matter which hand you use, you just got to develop it. The firing hand thumb is a little bit quicker, and you just got to practice it. That mistake will go away entirely very quickly if you practice it properly. You will feel the magazine be fully inserted, and you'll hear it, and then click the button. Again, the other option you have is the physical manipulations. I can insert the magazine fully and then come over the top of the slide, pulling it all the way to the rear and then letting it go. Or I can do a slingshot, inserting the magazine fully, rotating the gun into my support hand, and then pulling it all the way back and letting it go. And lastly, I can do the front serrations, inserting the mag, rolling my support hand up to my front serrations, pulling all the way back, and then letting go into my support hand so I can get my grip quickly. All of those options are slower than using your slide lock lever to release the slide. However, there are times where you are going to need to rack the slide to get a round back in the chamber. Sometimes your slide will not lock to the rear on the last round. You'll be shooting a string of rounds and I'll get a click, which can either be a primary malfunction with a bad ammunition, or it can be me running out of ammo. I don't really know, I can't confirm it at this time until I lock the slide to the rear. Again, if we get a click instead of a bang after shooting a bunch of rounds, it's always best practice just to pull back on the slide and see what happens. If it locks back, that's the gun telling you it needs more ammo. If it doesn't lock back, that's just the gun telling you it had some bad food in its mouth, and that'll look like this. Bang, 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 click, bang. If I run this drill without an optic, and I get a click instead of a bang, I need to confirm that my gun is empty, and I can use those three methods of physical manipulations, over the top, slingshot, or front serrations, to lock the slide to the rear. I don't need to use the thumb lever because the gun is going to tell me what it needs. If you have front serrations, it's a little bit quicker to use them in this step. That's because my hand's already in that position and I don't have to come over the top or completely release my grip to pull the slide to the rear. All I do is move the gun into my hand, pull it back, it's locked, so the gun's telling me it needs ammo, and now I move immediately to my new magazine, dump the old magazine, come up, press the slide lock lever, and come back down range. At speed, it looks like this. Let's move on to the proactive or tactical reload. So we have ammunition in our gun, and there's ammunition in the magazine. Bang, 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 bang. And I'm not getting a click, I'm choosing to reload my gun. Okay, let's break this down. I've made the decision to do a proactive reload. My sport hand still immediately moves to the new source of ammunition, and I'm going to bring it up to the magazine well. Here I need to make the decision whether it's worth keeping the ammunition that's inside this magazine or not. That's completely going to be dictated by your context and the speed required to get this fresh magazine in the gun. If you're performing a proactive reload, there likely isn't a concrete time standard, but it goes without saying that eventually isn't good enough. Remember, as soon as I click this magazine release button, there's only one round left in the chamber, and that's it. I have to get this new magazine into the gun to ensure that it has a reliable source of fresh ammunition. Let's say in this scenario that there's a bit of a rush and that I think there's only 1 or 2 rounds left in this magazine. It's likely not worth it for me to retain it, and it's a lot quicker just to dump it. Therefore, I'm going to treat this proactive reload exactly the same as an emergency reload. As I access my new magazine, I'm going to dump the old one and insert the new one. I don't need to use the slide lock lever or run the slide because there's already a round in the chamber. With proactive reloads, we want to ensure that we're not always training these in a static, up on target manner. In fact, it doesn't really make sense in a lot of situations for me to send a volley of rounds down range and then immediately go into a tactical reload if there's still a threat or a target to be shot. So incorporating the proactive or tactical reload, we should be trying to do it in different positions like behind cover or on the move. Now, if we think there's 5 or 10 rounds left in this magazine and we want to retain it for future use or possible future use, we're going to do something a little bit different. So we're making the proactive decision to reload. I want to ensure that I'm not removing this magazine until I'm ready with the new one. The reason for that is if I remove this magazine and stow it before I access the new one, this gun right now only has 1 round in the chamber. If I have to re-engage a target or a threat, it's no bueno to only have 1 round in the gun. So we're going to keep the old mag in the gun until the new mag is ready. Alright, we make the decision to reload. I immediately come down and access my new magazine and bring it up to here. And when we get to this point, I'm going to change my grip on the new magazine. It's going to go from my regular index point like this to a cigar hold. So from here to here. That's going to give me control over my index finger and my thumb. I'm going to use my index finger and my thumb to grab the old magazine and retain it because I want to keep it. There's rounds in there and I might want to use them. So I come up, I click my magazine release, and I let it fall between my finger and my thumb. Here. Now, I insert the new magazine like this. And I stow my old one. At full speed with magazine retention, it would look something like this. Making the decision to proactively reload. And back up. Now, a couple of things we want to address, because this always comes up, is where should my eyes be and where should my gun be? First, we'll cover the eyes. There is still a ton of information and instructors out there that will tell you to never look off of your target or your threat, and don't look at your gun during the reload. If I need to reload, that means one of 2 things. I was just in a really crappy situation and shot a lot of rounds, or I'm proactively deciding to put more rounds in the gun because it might get worse. So if our gun is turned into a gun-shaped beating stick and there's no rounds in it, it doesn't make sense for me to come back and try to do the reload while observing the target downrange and sitting here fumbling trying to get my magazine into an empty gun that is doing me no good. I want to ensure I return my gun to a gun status and then I can come back up and look. And what this look at the magazine well equates to in real time is about half a second if we're doing it properly. For instance, you can watch my eyes here. Up on target. Now, let's look at the consistency of that if I try to do the same thing at the same speed while keeping my eyes downrange and not on my magazine well. See what happens. Alright, so that was about 40% success rate on those reloads. So where my eyes are makes a big difference. Even at the exact same speed of the reloads, Looking down and ensuring for that half second or quarter second that I'm seating that magazine properly goes a long, long way to ensuring that it's a repeatable skill and I can depend on it when I need. Something else that shooters do to help index the point where their eyes need to go to, as well as their hands meet, is they lighten up and draw on the inside of the magazine well closest to your hand. What that does is give you a reference point for your eyes and finger to meet up at. With that said, our gun position and head position assists us with doing this quickly. If I'm doing my reloads down here, I'm obviously going to have more time off target with my eyes, and it's going to be a slower reload. I'm going to introduce you to the workspace. The workspace is basically the spot where we put our gun comfortably in front of our face so we can look at our gun and keep situational awareness and work on what needs to be done on the gun, whether that's a malfunction or a reload. Our workspace is basically our tabletop where we touch and play with our gun when we need to. Now remember, in terms of reloading, we want to ensure that we're dropping the magazine before we get to the workspace, which looks like this. If we try to drop the magazine at our workspace, we don't have gravity working to our advantage. Sometimes you'll get a magazine that likes to slowly and sluggishly come out of the magazine well. That might actually require you to rip out and causes a traffic jam with the new magazine coming up. It looks like this. Now for me, my workspace is about right here. So I'm looking right over top of the muzzle if I need to. The muzzle's in line with my nose, and I still have full visibility of my firearm when I'm looking at it, as well as the awareness around me. What we want to try to work on is figuring out a place that our workspace can sit consistently. We want to be able to index this just like we index our mags and indexed our draw position with our firing hand. We want to ensure that we take it back to the same workspace every time so that we're reliable in our reloads and our malfunctions. How I did this when I started building speed and consistency is I tried to find parts on my body that I could always hit reliably. So for instance, when I come back into my workspace, all I'm doing with my firing hand is taking my elbow and bringing it down till it stops. It can't go any further than here. And then all I do is lift my pinky up till it's facing upwards, like this. That is my workspace. If we just try to find a position in the open space around us here, what will happen is we're going to get into positions like this, and this, and this, and this, and it's not going to be consistent for us. We want to ensure that our workspace always looks the same, like this. Just like how we want our magazine pouches and our holster all set up to a position where our body wants to naturally get to and index to, we want to ensure that we can put our workspace at a spot that we can reliably come back to every time. Now finding a meeting point for our hands during the reload is a very difficult thing that takes time. One way you can build a point of reference or index point for your support hand, just like we do with our firing hand, is by putting our elbow next to our body. You can see that as I access my magazine, my elbow tends to flare out. All I need to do is, as I pull the magazine out of the pouch, I tuck my elbow into my side, which puts my magazine in a more dependable position to marry my hands together. The angles line up a lot better, and it's a better point of reference for me to marry my hands together. All I need to do is lift my arm up a tad bit from the reference point, and I'm in the mag well. A good way to work on the indexing point where your hands like to meet together is to break the reload down into two steps. The first step is accessing the magazine and bringing it to the firearm, and the second step is inserting it. A lot of shooters have had success by just doing the first step of this. Accessing the magazine, bringing it up to my index point, stopping and checking to see the alignment before I insert. This makes it efficient and easy to do multiple reps quickly, and it also helps you ensure that you're not smashing your fingers against the mag well until you have a properly good index point that you can speed right through. It's also worth mentioning that the pause you take to confirm the alignment between the magazine and the magazine well is going to differ depending on what firearm and mag well you are using. On a subcompact firearm like this, there's a couple extra things we need to consider. We need to ensure that our pinky is not covering the magazine well and that our palm isn't obstructing the entry of the magazine. You can see that the skin of my palm is going to squish in between, as well as my pinky here, obstructing the magazine from going fully into the gun. The width of the magazine well in comparison to the width of the magazine also makes a huge difference in the speed and time it takes to confirm the entry. That's why mag wells exist, to enlarge the opening and increase the repeatability of us slamming that magazine in. This is a BB gun, but the same principle applies. Single stack firearms generally give us less space and wiggle room to insert those magazines. This doesn't, however, mean you should be doing a slow reload. What you can do instead is add a little bit of a buffer zone here before fully inserting the magazine. Hitting the brakes a little bit in this buffer zone prior to pushing the magazine all the way in ensures I'm not going to make a catastrophic issue and then lose more time. Some firearms also have a flared magazine well, which assists with the insertion of the magazine. You can also use an enlarged mag well, like so, which gives you a cavernous space to allow the magazine to enter. And you can get mag wells that are about triple the size of this. You can see how much this magazine well has been assisting me in funneling the magazine into the right spot. The second phase is just the insertion and the reacquiring of the grip. Magazine is inserted, pushed into the palm, and my fingertips are going to stay, and the friction is going to start from my fingertips out. At full speed. Now we want to ensure that we're getting as close as possible back to our first and final grip. Practicing the second stage of the reload will ensure that we don't get into bad habits of establishing poor grips. Just like we talked about in the draw video, we want to ensure that our reloads are smooth before we start trying to blaze at them. It is important to go stupid fast. It's also very important to go dumb slow from time to time. We want to ensure that our body is smoothing out the whole process, and then we can speed it up to ensure that it's smooth at speed as well. Remember, smooth is not fast, fast is fast. Smooth helps us get to fast. It should be mentioned as well that although reloads are really cool and they're fun to train, we shouldn't, again, be putting a disproportionate amount of time into training them. That's not to say that reloads aren't important, but they're definitely not as important as the 12 or more rounds that we had to send down range to get to the reload. We need to ensure that the rounds that we're firing to get to the reload are hitting their target quickly and accurately before we spend a huge amount of time on reloading quickly. A competent level to get to in reloads for the time being to ensure that you have the base level of skill would be underneath 2 seconds for open top pouches and underneath 3 seconds for closed top pouches. Remember, cutting a half second or full second off your reload is awesome and it's helpful, but it might not be as helpful as the time you could have spent getting better at shooting.